All right, I'm at a point in my Delphine hat where I've finished one pattern repeat, and I think now would be a great time to put in a lifeline. So I thought I would pause here for a minute and just show you how I might do that, how I would do that. Okay, so I've got my project here. I've got a few supplies as well. I've got a little bit of pearl cotton number 8. Pearl cotton number 8 is nice because it's really thin. You can see that it's like fingering weight yarn, but it's thinner than the yarn that I'm using, and it's a different color, so I can see it nicely. If I do have to pull back those stitches and I'm looking for that lifeline, you want it to be visible. So I need a length of yarn that is smooth. I just got a knot in here. I need a length of yarn that is smooth and will slide through my stitches. That's why I like the cotton. It's also very strong, and it's a contrasting color to the project that I'm working on. And then I need a wool needle, something that I can easily slide through the stitches on my needle. So I'm going to pick a tapestry needle that is blunt. I don't want to split the stitches. That has a nice opening that I can fit my yarn through, yet is not so thick that it makes it difficult for me to perhaps slide it through the stitches on the needle. So I'm going to go with this one. I'm just going to thread my SOS, Save Our Stitches yarn, or my lifeline, onto my tapestry needle. And I'm not going to put a knot in it or anything like that. I'm just looping it over so that I have about half of the yarn folded over on itself. And then I'm just going to take my knitting. I have worked one stitch past my marker before I put it down. That's just so that the marker doesn't fall off in transit. And so I'll put that back on here. Here we go. So I'm at the end of the marker. This is the last round of my repeat, and so I feel like this would be a good place to put in my safety line. And I'm basically just going to slide my needle along here. But I want you to notice that as I do that, like, I'm in danger of splitting the stitches because there's no room under the needle for this wool needle. So here's what I do. I'm going to pull my knitting needle, my circular needle, through so that the stitches are resting just on the cord. And now I can slide my wool needle in just under the cord. Oops, just under the cord of the circular needle. I'm just following it along, kind of pulling the stitches down with my left hand because I don't want to split those stitches. That would make it harder later to get the yarn out. So where I've gone as far as I think I can comfortably go with my wool needle, I'll then pull the yarn through, leaving a nice long tail dangling down here, and I'll resume what I'm doing. Now, when you get to a stitch marker, you don't want to include the stitch marker in your safety line. So definitely pull your yarn through, skip the stitch marker, don't put your needle through it, go around it, because we don't want that stitch marker trapped in the safety line. That doesn't work. It just creates a bit of a, well, not a disaster, but you would have to cut your safety line. So if you did end up putting your safety line through your marker and it was a not unlockable marker, like this one is a round marker, you could later on when you're working the next row, you could pull your safety line out and snip it so that you could move that marker up for the next row. But if you can avoid the markers, that's better. So I just come along and put my blunt tip needle. Oh, see, my markers did fall off. I'll put them back on in a second when I get back to the beginning. Okay, when I get to the next marker. Now, you might be saying, this is a little tedious. Why are we doing this? So it might be helpful to remind yourself that the reason you're doing this is that if you make a mistake further up, and if you can't repair that mistake or think back to correct it, and you do have to rip back several rows, what the safety line is doing is it's preserving your stitches in the correct sequence and order and number that you had. So essentially, it's preserving your stitches so that you don't have to rip back to the very end of your work. And honestly, it doesn't take that long. It's, what is that saying? A stitch in time is worth 9. And so this is kind of one of those times when having a safety line could save you some struggles down the road. The safety line just prevents the stitches from, see, I almost wanted to go through that marker. The safety line prevents the stitches from unraveling any further. So if you do have to rip back, you can rip back with confidence, knowing that you're not going to go all the way back to the end, and that the row that, or the round that you are ripping back to is one that is correct. You've counted it, you know it works. It's a good place to start over from if you need to start over. I'm getting close to the end here, and these stitches are creeping back up onto my needle, so I'm just going to continue to pull the stitches onto the cord so that I can slip my wool needle underneath them. Because again, if they get onto the knitting needle itself, there is very little room for you to skim that needle underneath. There we go. So I've put my safety line in, it's all the way around, and what I'm going to do now is just leave it there. I will kind of even up the ends here. I'm just going to pull on this a little bit. And I'll put a little slip knot in here. That I can remove later. And I'm just going to leave that safety line in there, put my marker back on. And I'm ready to begin my next row of the chart. And so on this next row, you just want to be sure that you're not knitting the safety line in with your stitches. I'll just knit a couple of stitches here to show you what I mean. So on the row after the safety line, you want to insert your needle in there, and don't include the safety line with your stitch. Just continue to work your stitches in whatever, if you need to put a yarn over in there, if you need to decrease 2 stitches, go right ahead. It's not going to hurt anything. Just try to keep an eye on that safety line and make sure that it's not being incorporated into the stitch on the row above. Later on, you can remove the safety line. You just pull it out. And again, that's why it's important to make sure that your safety line is a smooth fiber so that it doesn't kind of felt to your work. It's also nice if it's a little bit slippery, so cotton is nice and smooth, and again, it's very strong. And you want it to be really thin. You don't want it to be so thick that it's actually changing your gauge on that particular row. The last thing is that it's good if it's not a color that might leave transfer on your work. So let's say you had some red cotton, and red is notorious for leaving behind a little bit of dye residue. So if you're working with something that has a color on it, make sure that it's not going to transfer to your stitches when you pull it out. You can imagine if this was all cream or white and I used a fuzzy blue yarn, when I pull it out, I might leave little bits of blue fiber or dye behind. So that's why I like to have this little ball of pearl cotton. It will last me probably the rest of my life if I just used it for safety lines. Very thin, nice and strong, ready to go. And again, thin tapestry needle with a blunt tip and an eye that's easy for threading. but not so big that the eye would cause any kind of concerns trying to get it through those stitches. All right, I finished my hat, and I no longer need this safety line, so I thought you might like to see me pull it out. So here we go, just easing it through the stitches. I don't want to cut anything or have it snag on anything. So you can see some of the places where I pulled on a little tight, but I'm just going to block it here. Finger block it, finger press it, and voila,